Welcome to the Sunrise Podcast, powered by Sunrise Labs.
All right, welcome into the podcast. I'm your host today, Tyler Kern, and I'm talking to Adam Jacobs, and he's the Chief Technology Officer at Sunrise Labs. Adam, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So we're talking about being able to get medical development devices to the market a little bit faster. And so we're going to talk about that today and just get a little bit more of a sense of what Sunrise Labs does and what their role in that process is. So Adam, let's just start off by talking about what types of things that you do at Sunrise Labs on a regular basis.
So generally at Sunrise Labs, we're involved in the product development phase of bringing a medical devices to the market. Although it's not exclusively medical, it's about 90%. And that includes everything from defining the product and then developing it so that it's ready to go to production. We don't do production, but we'll do the product definition and the feasibility stages. And the real core is making the product that can be FDA approved and manufactured. We also do have sort of a focus. Many companies come at this from an industrial design perspective or a mechanical engineering. Our core really is complicated systems. So we do a lot of electronics and software, optics, and we do have mechanical and usability and ID as well. But it really, I would say that the deep genes that we have is complicated system development.
Yeah, that's really, really fascinating to me and really important work. You mentioned doing a lot of work to make sure that a device could be FDA approved. And so part of what interests me is just the process of learning how to make that happen. So how much does your experience really play a role in what you do every day? Just knowing what the FDA is going to do and that sort of thing. How much does that play a role in what you do?
Well, because we have such a broad client base, and we've been doing this for a long time, about 27 years. We see a lot of things, and we see all the different trade-offs that you have to make during product development, and that's a pretty broad set of trade-offs. In terms of the FDA itself, during product development, there are specific requirements for example, quality system processes, and we do all that. We are 1345 certified, and we go through a process when we're developing something so that the output of that can be submitted to the FDA according to their requirements. But there's a much larger picture in terms of the kinds of things that you might want to do during your product development. For example, there's a lot of different players that you have to accommodate when you're all done. You have to be able to manufacture it. You have to be able to make money on it. You have to make sure that it's reliable. You have to make sure that it's economic for the users. There's lots of trade-offs, and because we see so many projects and different types of projects, we sometimes have a perspective that someone who works in a company that's focused on maybe one market segment or one kind of project, or maybe sometimes even people work for many years on a single product that they don't get exposure to.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. You definitely have that wide angle lens to be able to see all of the different moving parts that play a role in this. And as such, I think a lot of times you're able to then see and anticipate some of the things that really slows down medical device development from taking place maybe as quickly as it could. What are some of those things that slows it down and keeps things from coming to market maybe as quickly as they otherwise would be able to?
Yeah, that's a great question, and lots of people want to do this as efficiently and quickly as possible. Investors often have they want to make it to profitability as soon as they can, and everybody really wants to do it less expensively and shorter. There are many things that we see because we probably have 20 or so projects at any given time, and I'm just super lucky because as CTO I get to see most of them, but our team gets exposed to lots of projects, and there's definitely things that are the stumbling points and the things that slow people or companies down from getting from here to there. I think that you can generally break this down into a number of different things. The first thing is being really clear on getting the product definition that the market really wants. Sometimes we see people having an idea, they haven't really fleshed it out, and they haven't thought through some of those interactions that we just spoke about with all the different players. So having a really clear vision of what that market really wants to see in the product and how they would use it is probably a great place to start. Another and that ends up folding into basically having really good requirements. Requirements are the input into a product that sometimes people come to us with, say, a market or a usability or a user requirements, and we'll turn that into what the product has to be. And sometimes they don't even know. Sometimes they just come with an idea. So there are to get a good mature vision of what you really want it to be is one of the best things you can do, because often as you're working through these things, you're learning, and you end up learning that, well, that wasn't as important as we thought and this was, and then all of a sudden you have to switch gears in the middle of a project, and everybody knows that when you change things later downstream, that's an expensive and time-consuming thing to do. So a couple of things that to do that are that up front, it's great to ask quite a number of users about what they think, more than you think you might need, because there's a very diverse group of users usually for medical devices, and which does not mean that that they know all the answers. If you ask Steve Jobs, he'd never ask users. He had a vision of how he interacted with something, and he was just very sensitive to how somebody uses. So I always like to say, think like a user. Try to incorporate that and feel what they feel. Another thing that that leads to is good requirements, and then that vision will lead to good requirements. And finally, at the very beginning, it's really good to be able to rapidly iterate, so that when you're trying things, you'll often have concepts and ideas and requirements, and really work through that. Don't just hit the first one you want. That you come across, make sure that you've really worked it, so that when you go into the process, you feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that you mentioned, and it sounds to me like when you're talking about something like this, that clear communication and understanding exactly what somebody wants is a large part of what you do. And so how do you go about having that conversation, and what does that conversation look like to clearly understand what is required in this case and what the person is asking for?
So sometimes people come to us with they have experience in the field, and we try to bring that to light to see what they do and don't know. So we'll ask them essentially to educate us about what they do and don't know, and we get a sense of how deep they are into that process. Often we sort of dive in and start asking lots and lots of questions, and then start guiding the conversation towards, how does a user see this, and how does somebody use it, and how what are the issues that come up. So there's a lot of early on, there's a lot of what I call just exploration, both of technical exploration, because we're such a technical team here. We often look for technical problems. People come to us sometimes and they have an idea that may or may not be possible or feasible, or just on the very edge of what's physically possible, and then you have to sort of tease that stuff out. So in terms of and that will often lead to implications on the product definition. So both in terms of the we've learned that you really have to understand the way it's used and try to optimize that, and what I call do a channel Steve Jobs a little bit, really feel how it would use to use that, and then on the technical side, make sure that these steps really make sense, because they sometimes do and sometimes don't.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, just how often do people come to you with ideas that simply aren't feasible, and how do you go about, do you try to craft a solution where you kind of change what they initially wanted to be able to fit and to be something that is possible, or how do those conversations typically go?
I think one of the great things about working here is that we have this kind of high integrity culture, and we feel like we have to be honest with people. So, and we really take it to heart that we want them to succeed. Our philosophy is if they succeed, then we do.
Mm-hmm.
So if we see a problem, and we do. I mean, I guess I play a lot of this frontline role here, where people will come in, and it's not that we know all the answers, but sometimes we've seen things. There's some specific examples. Might be that I have a lot of experience, for example, in developing cancer classifiers,
Mm-hmm.
classification, automated classification devices. And I see people come in and they have an idea, and having spent many years in it, you know some of the pitfalls, and you talk about those pitfalls, and sometimes people think that that they've got a handle on it, and sometimes they think they do, and we think that they have a lot to learn, or a lot more work that's needed. And so sometimes we'll try to basically, we'll just bring it up, and we'll talk about doing, early upfront work, feasibility work, or trying to proof of concept work to see if those really are issues, and we'll generate a risk list, and we'll do what we call technology readiness assessments. So there's lots of things that we can do to try to not only find those things, but to decide whether they're overcomable. We have a project now which we're just not sure if it will work. There are some physics and physical limitations about it. It's an optical sensing device, and there's a whole research program to just see whether this is possible.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just pushing the limits, and that's a little unusual for us. We often are more in the after that phase, which is basically the product development portion of it. But when we see these feasibility questions, we really try to put those into the forefront, because spending a lot of money developing a product that's going to have a problem later is just a waste of time and money, and nobody's happy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to kind of craft a question, and you can tell me if this makes sense or not. But you are in the world of product development, as you mentioned, and in the larger ecosystem, how of eventually producing medical devices. How does you at Sunrise Labs doing your job make everyone else's job along the process of making this device? How does you doing your job well make everyone else's jobs easier?
So if we do our job well, we can help guide the process in a way that helps avoid some of the pitfalls that people may or may not be aware of, or we'll work with people. There's some people we work with that are very experienced, and they really know their stuff, and we're just good at execution. So there's sort of different types of interactions that we have, but a lot of times we might bring up issues that are try to guide them through this process and say, look, the requirements, you really need to focus on this stuff, or if the device fails, how are you going to deal with it? It's called an FMEA. So if the device fails, and when you let those things be unresolved, they end up being problems. So we have, for example, a status report, and we put those things up in it, so that we say these are risk items, and we have a list of risk items, and we keep bringing them up, because people tend to bury those risk items and do what they can do because they're trying to make progress, and they have deadlines. And so we will try to guide them through the process, and in a way that doesn't leave those risks unresolved, and also that the process is what's needed, because it's a regulated environment. There's things you have to do. So make sure that there are some people who have less experience. There's startup companies and things like that, and you have to educate them about all that. So, and we do that.
Right. Now you mentioned earlier just the number of projects you get to be involved in, and you said it with a certain amount of joy and enjoyment in your voice, and I get the sense that you really do love what you get to do. And so what are some of the things that you've seen that you're excited about, or what are some of the advancements in the field that have you energized and excited to go to work every day?
So it's a great question. I mean, I always have always thought that there's, from a personal perspective, there's at least two things that make a job and a place to come great. One is just being around good people, and the kind of cultural things and Sunrise is just a joy to come to. It's really a nice place, and the people are good, and it's a high integrity place. So that has a lot to do with it, and the way we interact with our clients. It just makes that. But also the kind of things we work on is just really great. I have a saying that if you go to a party and you can brag about what you do, it's a good sign. So when you're working in the medical device industry, it's great because we work on life support devices, things that people would die without. We work on robotic surgery devices. We work on both in vitro and in vivo diagnostic devices. Complicated optical systems. There's a whole bunch of treatment type things that we do, electrical stimulation or surgical devices. We've worked on blood processing, and it's just endless. There's just so much variety. It's just a joy to be able to work on all those kinds of things, and there's always interesting problems. And we're good at overcoming them, and that's really satisfying. And that you're doing good work and helping people live better lives, and it's great.
Yeah, you can really hear the joy that you have and the passion that you have for what you do come across when you speak about it. And I think that last aspect shouldn't get lost in everything. Just that you do at the end of the day get to say that you're helping people and helping people live better lives and live longer lives. And I think that there has to be like a certain amount of that is incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, it's great. So sort of back to the main topic, helping to really get to that point, there's a lot of things that have to go right. Mm-hmm. So the things that the specific steps about how to make all those go right is what we try to bring to the table. And some specifics, maybe are in order. For example, we talked about defining the product. Often what we talk about with people is, especially when you're starting with a new product, there's an idea of what's called a minimum viable product. And a minimum viable product is the things that you absolutely need to have to go to market and succeed. Mm-hmm. And often that's a great place to start because everything outside of that burdens the project with both risk and timeline and money that you may or may not want to bear. So that's a great thing, and it takes a lot of perseverance and discipline to stick to that. And one thing we say is be ruthless with sticking to your MVP. Doesn't mean you can't add a few things that you want to, but in general, that's a great way to make sure that you're going to get to market faster. I was also going to say that also in the definition of the product, there's ways that you can define a product that are easier to do. For example, if you make a product that's both hard to develop and validate, because some validation is much harder. For example, and everybody in the medical field knows, say the difference between a PMA and a 510K, which is whether you have to go to clinical trials and prove that it actually has efficacy. That's a big difference, and there's lots of gradations in that. It's for an example, I spoke about this before, might be that let's say you have a device that is looking at, maybe it's an optical signature of a cancer. Is it a cancer that's easy to get? Are the signatures easy to get? Are they very rare? Mm-hmm. Is data hard to get? If data is hard to get, it's going to be hard to validate. If data is easy to get, example that might be scanning pathology slides. You can go to a place and get 10,000 pathology slides with reports tomorrow. So there's certain things that make it easy for you to get there, and the definition of the product and the whole ecosystem is important in thinking about that. Right.
And when you were mentioning earlier, just keeping that goal in mind, and then having something and really focusing in on that goal and making sure that the other things didn't get in the way of achieving it. It kind of reminded me, I suppose, that keeping that goal in mind really does probably put into focus efficiency and and productivity, and ensuring that what you do is of the highest quality and highest standard.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's true. It's hard to be that disciplined sometimes for people when they start to think about all the things they can do, as opposed to the things that they ought to do. There's also details in the development process, and we started to talk about this. But there's a list of things that I look for in terms of the development process. We have a thing that we do, which I tend to be involved in a lot. It's called Phase 0, and it's a feasibility and invention phase. And we were talking about this before, where you want to make sure that you've put those risks to bed before you start investing all this money in the downstage stuff. So if you're if you're a small company or a big company with an idea that you're not sure about, you try to put the investment that you have towards overcoming early feasibility questions and bringing. We have a process which we call technology readiness assessment, and deciding where you are, and if bringing that to the point where you feel comfortable that the risks are low enough that it's time to move to the later phases. And one of the things I always tell people is don't leave hanging problems that can derail a project. If you have something, prioritize those and keep solving those. So this phase 0 can be done in parallel with early phases. Like, for example, if you're going to do market requirements and usability requirements and early ID type of sketches, you can do some of this in parallel. That's another thing that we do often to shorten the time frame.
Right. Yeah. And you know what? As I hear you talking about this, reminds me that you've been in the industry and been in the business long enough to kind of see how that works and see how other people might miss that aspect, but you've have that amount of time in the industry to know that you can do certain things in parallel and keep things moving at the same time, and then also just acknowledging what some of the pitfalls are that people who might be either too enthusiastic or wanting to jump in, you're able to see those and kind of map those out beforehand.
I mean, one of the most satisfying things I can do sometimes is slow people down.
Yeah.
And I hate to say that because usually people are in a hurry, but sometimes you say, look, I call it back burner development. Let's solve this problem, and then we're going to turn the gas up, and but let's keep the spend low and solve the fundamentals, and then when we really feel good about it, then we're going to just accelerate, and you'll be really ready to you haven't wasted all your resources before you're ready to go. So then when you do get to the later phases, there's also just the kind of pitfalls of development that can happen. For example, one of the things that I'm a big proponent of is getting the architecture right. The architecture is the general framework of a device. It could be software, electronics, mechanical things, and that architecture defines really it's like the skeleton of the device. And when you get that right, lots of things go right. And when you get that wrong, you have lots of limitations, and things can start to be problematic later. I mean, a simple example might be that you have a communication protocol, and is that protocol adequate? Is it robust? What happens when things go wrong? Does that communication protocol break down? For example, we have some intellectual property about how we have we call it a blackboard, and all these things are writing into this blackboard, and it can things can go wrong, and the blackboard doesn't change. All that communication is on a deterministic schedule. Nothing that happens changes it. So it's a big thing that we do, where we do a lot of state chart kind of development, and it makes things deterministic. So that's one of the things I say is make things deterministic, so that you're not looking at all kinds of exceptions that end up getting into your product that then make it break. So those are the kind of architectural choices that are really important, and you get a feeling for these after doing it for so many years.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about architecture like that, it really drives home how important that aspect of what you do is, where does that occur in the process, and how does that set up the rest of a project from once that's been decided on?
So that happens in what we call phase one, which is you're setting up all your plans and setting the whole platform that you're going to do the project. It's not only the architectural platform, it's the project planning and the documentation and the process that you're going to use. So that would be phase one. We then go into phase two, which is the actual development activities. And there's some things there that one can do also to speed things up. For example, we say that we like to develop these subsystems and know that they work as a subsystem, so that you're not and you isolate that. If you do your architecture right, you can isolate a subsystem, get those subsystems to work. Then another subsystem is not going to interact with it in a way that will break it. So that's one thing that we do, and that comes down to sort of testing early and often, especially like in software, for example. We run agile processes, and we'll test the output very regularly, daily and or weekly, or to make sure that the things that we're doing are working. And the funny part about this is that a lot of the issues also with product development are human factors. It's not just that there's a process and technology. A lot of what we see, probably maybe the biggest thing we see, is the human ways that people interact. For example, often, we just say the communication is so important between everybody that you have to communicate effectively, but it's not about communicating status. It's about communicating the things that you need to make decisions on, and communicating in a way that's productive. So there's some projects, especially we've had these with much larger companies, and a lot of the communication, they want it to be status oriented. Where are you? What are you doing? And they want to feel that they're in the loop. And that's important to some extent, but it's also important to focus that on in a productive way, so that you're using that communication not just to get everybody up to speed, but also to use it productively to make decisions. And that is one of the things that we talk about a lot. The other is that, I really believe that people should focus on their core competency. Like a company usually has some kind of secret sauce or expertise that makes them special. Maybe it's a biotech company and they have a molecule that can read a certain kind of disease state or treat something or diagnose something, and they don't really know about pneumatics and electronics and software. And so I say often that it's great to outsource the rest to experts, because if you involve experts, and the word I like to use is fabulous, fabulous team members, because it's a whole different level when people really know what they're talking about in a field. So you want to get your whole team to be really as fabulous as you can in their expertise. So, and that usually involves bring in experts, and instead of outsourcing what is not needed as the core competency. I think that's a really important part of and trusting those people, because that ends up slowing a lot of projects down. People end up developing something, they think they can do it less expensively or faster, and often those things come back to us and we end up having to redo them. So that's that human interaction part of it, and getting the right team is just so critical. Another important point is just on a technical level, when you're making your actual design decisions, there's an idea of how much innovation you need. And there's this concept that I like to use, which is you really want to minimize the innovation you need. And there's often an impulse to use bleeding edge technology, things that are the latest things, the newest things, the fastest chips, the kind of latest buzzwords. And sometimes that's really appropriate, because you're really stretching the limits of what can be done. Biotech does that all the time, or you really need that we have an optical detection system, which really is pushing the limits that needs to really push as far as you can. But you want to minimize innovation. If you have one or two innovative things in a product, that's good. If you have 7 or 8, the chance of innovating on all 7 and 8 and having them all work, is low enough that you really add a lot of risk to your project.
Right,
so
right.
Those are all things that we see over and over again. And sort of getting back to that human and corporate culture factor.
Mm-hmm.
There's this we often see that people are having trouble making decisions or moving quickly, and sometimes if they either are more disciplined or let us guide them, it actually sometimes works better. When you have a decision that needs to be made, we have a mechanism for that called a decision, an analysis form, where we'll analyze something and say, here's our conclusion and our recommendation, but it's your decision. You have to trade off cost for size or weight or some user function. Here's the trade-off. We actually think it should be this, but what do you think? And it's your choice.
Mm-hmm.
So making those kind of decisions in a timely manner, which can be difficult, especially for big companies with lots of layers and lots of players. But that's a really key thing, is to be able to make decisions quickly.
Yeah, and you have these, I'm sure that you have these companies and these people that have this grand goal in mind, and you have to bring it down and make sure that each step along the way and each layer that you're involved with is feasible, is able to be able to be done. You have to make sure communication is good, and a lot of other things along the road, like you've talked about. I think that is that's a process that probably takes a steady hand and needs some wisdom involved to make sure that people, with the best of intentions and the greatest visions of what they can accomplish, are actually able to achieve something along the lines of what they're trying to do.
Right. And because we interact with so many companies, and it's sort of like, talking to people, you learn to see the strengths and weaknesses of that particular organization. And sometimes you can impact that and sometimes you can't. So we try to give our feedback, honestly and helpfully, in a constructive way. We have a saying here. It's one of our core credos. It's called assumption of positive intent. And it brings up a point, because we assume that everybody's trying to do the right thing. And it's almost always true. I really believe this in my heart, that people can disagree 100% and they both are thinking that they're doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mostly comes down to the perspective that they're taking. For example, the manufacturing person, might be looking at, how easy is it this to make? What's the yield? The marketing person is looking at, is the user going to like it? The financial person is looking at what's the profit level. The clinical person is looking at what's the efficacy of the device. They're all trying to do the best they can, but they tend to optimize the thing that they're looking at. So there's this system-wide perspective that kind of gets back to what we were talking about before, within an organization. And someone has to make those trade-offs. Someone has to say, yes, I understand, that this is best for you, but as a whole, total, that the decision, I think, should be this. And we do try to provide that guidance when we can. And it might be, for example, between a mechanical or an electrical or a software or an optical solution. You can, to give a trivial kind of example, you can do something mechanically with a gear. You can do something with a control loop and a motor in electronics. You can have software calibrated, or and so which is the best way to do it? And there's a sort of wisdom of that that you have to apply to that. So that's on the technology development, and then there's a bigger picture when you're dealing with organizations, the interactions that we have. There's a regulatory person and all those other things we talked about, that you're trying to balance all that so that they can make their decisions. And that's where people get stuck a lot. So when if you have somebody who can make that global decision, it really helps getting to market faster.
What really strikes me about our conversation is, as much as your job is technology and you are a chief technology officer, your job also seems to be as much about interacting with people and understanding how to manage those relationships and manage those conversations and to help people move forward with decisions, as much as it is making sure that the technology is also up to the standards that it needs to be.
I think that's true. It's very much true, and CTO is my title here. I have kind of a pretty broad background. I've been the VP of various things in the past of mostly R&D and development groups, but it often comes down to people, either the people who are developing it or the people who are financing it, and the human interaction part of this, or just usability of the people using the product. That's such an important part of it. But you're right that, at the heart, we are technologists and we love to get in there and, move electrons and screw screws and write software.
Absolutely. Well, Adam, it's been fascinating learning more about what you do at Sunrise Labs and learning more about the process by which something goes from, just an idea into full implementation, and the part that you play in it has been really exciting and really interesting to learn about today. So I really appreciate you joining me on the podcast.
Mm-hmm. And I hope this helps people developing products to try to get there faster.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.